Thinking of what a healthy work environment actually means for all, we have to appreciate that work and the environment is produced from a very male-dominated view and created for men. So even when we develop policies in our work environment to take into account the different biological needs of the different sexes, it's often reactionary. So what it means to unpack that and include different people means understanding how people function in their biology. This includes many different people. Men, women, transgender persons, intersex persons, all might have different needs of your environment. If you have a very singular sense of who's in your workplace, then the work environment will not be healthy for a lot of people. And so they won't advance in the same way. The higher you go with most professions, the less and less of different people you see. And eventually you just have a group of men.
Going into the workplace, women face a huge number of challenges, particularly in relation to their sexual and reproductive health. This episode maps the experience of an imaginary woman, Sophia, as she progresses through the workforce, looking at the hurdles she faces and the human rights that are relevant to each situation. Sophia has 1,000 different faces. She represents billions of people, but her struggles echo in every woman's experience of work. The first hurdle that Sophia might face is just being allowed to work. Women are still considered the caregivers, and even in countries where she would not be actively prevented from working, she will often still face cultural expectations to stay home or to prioritize a male partner's career over her own.
I think that it is important for us in the Philippines, to see that this is a human right to work. Without the human rights language, then it's a matter of what is culturally acceptable. There are roles, and these are roles that we are expected to play. The main breadwinner is the husband. The wife is the main caregiver for the family. If she wants to take on unemployment outside, she may do so for as long as she doesn't forget her main preoccupation. So it's always cultural. You have to ask your husband's permission. But if it is framed as a right, then I think even in the discussion, even in the bargaining, you know where you stand. The woman will know that this is a right I have, and that we talk about it as equals. It's not me begging you to please, allow me to have a life. So I think that makes a whole lot of difference, even in terms of the confidence a woman has.
Everyone has an equal right to work. This should translate into Sophia's career being considered just as important as a man's. She should not have to negotiate with her partner in order to be able to work. The second hurdle she'll face is discrimination. Sophia applies for a number of jobs, but even though she has exactly the same CV as her friend John, it takes her much longer to find a job.
I would say this is a subtle preference for men, precisely because men don't have to leave work to give birth or to attend to their children's parents-teachers conference,
It can be difficult to prove that a female candidate has been sidelined in favour of a male one, but there is an important clue. In interviews, employers often ask explicitly or implicitly whether a woman is planning to start a family. Discrimination of this type violates women's human rights, and international human rights bodies can be a useful tool in fighting this kind of discrimination.
One of the Commission's key roles is monitoring the UK government's compliance with the various international treaties to which it's signatory. One of the recommendations we made recently to the CEDAW committee was for the UK government to take steps to stop employers asking questions about family planning or pregnancy and maternity at interview stage. We know that despite it being really clear that you can't, because there are obviously concerns about discrimination as a result, a lot of employers think it's still reasonable to ask a woman and they wouldn't ask a man. We would like to see the UK government amend the Equality Act so that there is a ban on pre-employment questions relating to family planning or pregnancy and maternity.
Everyone has the right to non-discrimination. This should translate into Sophia never having to face questions about family plans and having an equal opportunity to secure employment as a man with the same qualifications. But then comes hurdle number 3. Like 5 to 10% of women, Sophia struggles with severely painful periods, but neither her employer nor her doctor take this seriously.
Some people can't go to work. They have endometriosis, they have adenomyosis, they have dysmenorrhea, painful periods. We don't have any clear policies to protect women.
There are workplaces that don't really recognize that as an issue. There are clinics where the doctors also don't think that that's an issue, and it's not being taken seriously.
Even in cases where there's a medical solution to such problems, women can be denied access to the treatment on the assumption that they can't make decisions about their own reproductive health.
It's a case before the Constitutional Court in Colombia right now that addresses a 30-year-old woman whose period is so intense and she has so many problems. 20 days out of the month, she is unable to work. So she goes before the healthcare system and asks for a hysterectomy to change this and to be able to have a different quality of life, and she's denied because that could compromise her ability to have children in the future. She's saying, I understand that and I want the procedure. And then she's been told, no, you can't. And you're not able to decide about it. I think this case particularly highlights these gender stereotypes. It's been said, your role is to reproduce and to have children. While her decision is, I want to be part of the workforce. Her decision is being overruled by the healthcare system, saying, no, you cannot. You cannot decide this. What is prioritized here is your reproductive ability.
Everyone has the right to sexual and reproductive health, and also to make autonomous decisions about their own body. This should translate into period-related health problems being taken seriously by both employers and healthcare workers, and Sophia having the final say on any treatment she may need. And then the 4th hurdle appears. Sophia experiences workplace bullying and notices that her gay, lesbian, gender non-conforming and transgender colleagues do too. Bullying and sexual harassment often forces women, as well as gender and sexual minorities and other marginalised people, into a narrower selection of jobs, excluding them from fields which have a patriarchal culture.
So you have less women in boards because it's harder to be in that space. A lot of gay people go within the civil society movement because it's easier to actually be yourself within the organization that recognizes you for who you are. Same with transgender people. So your job opportunities start to become very, very, very limited. And a lot of people are pushed into less desirable for them forms of work. So some people want to be part of sex work, great. Some people have to be because no one wants to hire a transgender person. And this is a job that you can get. So those are some of the aspects of having a very linear understanding of work, because you say, this is a working space. No, it's a working space for men. Unpack it and start including other people.
Often, solving this problem is about adopting good workplace policies that tackle sexual harassment and take bullying seriously. Workplaces can set good examples for their workers by having strong, gender-responsive policies that respect their employees' identities.
So you can't have a policy that only addresses male and female. You must have a policy that addresses gender in its diversity.
There are existing protections for women in the workplace or for individuals in the workplace in relation to harassment. But we know from our call for evidence that they are not actually addressing the problem. So what we would like to see is government implement a much stronger legislative duty on employers to take preventative steps to address harassment.
But non-diverse workplaces are less likely to put in place and implement such policies, and so the problem becomes cyclical. One strategy that can help workplaces to break out of this cycle is affirmative action or positive measures.
There are times when people sneer at affirmative action and the importance of women being supported to get into spaces in government and private sector, but that representation is really important because men may not fully understand the challenges that women go through to both work and be a mom or to just work and be a woman. So we do need women in leadership.
Everyone has the right to be free from harassment. This should translate into a welcoming workplace culture where employees and colleagues respect the diverse identities of workers and have policies that respond to their needs. Sophia then encounters hurdle number 5. She is at a higher risk of sexual assault than her male colleagues. This risk affects Sophia's actions in a number of ways and can impact her job opportunities even if she is never assaulted.
A law firm that I used to work in made me understand why women don't advance as far and as fast. Because almost every evening they would expect you to stay past working hours, which is 7, 8, 9, 10. But we didn't get parking within the office building. So we had to park at a nearby church, which was a walk. And at night, that walk involved passing through a strange field that could have anyone there hiding. So it was a decision. You had to calculate, do I want to get raped or do I want to keep the job? Because you still have to walk, you still have to go home somehow. And most of the people that I was working with didn't have cars. So I was worried about the walk. Some people were worrying about, okay, I have to leave, find public transport at 9 p.m., end up in the house at 11, and who am I meeting in between? And this is easier to calculate for a man because men don't consistently worry about violence. Men, they don't constantly worry about violence. Women do, transgender persons do, intersex persons do because they face violence constantly. So they can just calculate and decide, no, I'm going to stay till 11. And then over time you start to see that, well, the men in the firm are more reliable. No, the work environment is easier for them to be reliable, just not for anybody else.
And of course, Sophia will also face the risk of sexual violence within the workplace itself.
When, for example, the sexual violence cases are reported, companies don't take them very seriously. And companies must have channels in terms of when I'm offended, I need to go through the process of reporting and action must be taken.
Everyone has the right to be free from sexual violence. Workplaces must actively discourage violence and take the matter extremely seriously if it does occur. Sophia then finds out she's pregnant. Hurdle 6. She's worried because this could get her fired.
When we met at the interview, she was not visibly pregnant. By the time we started, she was visibly pregnant. And this caused like a huge uproar in the firm. It's like, how can you come here pregnant? Why didn't you tell us? In reality, she didn't know, but she's not obliged to tell them. And that was a huge fight, actually, within the firm, whether or not she should be allowed to take leave or just fired. Eventually, they settled on allowing her to take leave and paying her, but it was a very frictious situation. And in that friction, you could see the role that human resources was playing, which was none. Nothing to protect her, nothing to help her. Basically, they're saying the same thing as the firm. Why didn't you tell us you were pregnant? I'm like, but this isn't your role in a company. So one thing would be, when you hire human resources and you have human resources departments, let them actually be that. Let them not be like a dummy for the company to continue to do what it wants. They actually have to be able to protect people within the workplace.
We worked with the government to undertake a major programme of research into the scale and prevalence and the types of maternity and pregnancy discrimination that women face. So what we heard through our research were numerous instances of women being dismissed, being made redundant as a result of informing an employer that they were pregnant, or being made redundant when they were on maternity leave. The responses we got from employers is that they understand their obligations in relation to equality in employment, and a lot of them have, very comprehensive policies in place. The issue we have is that they don't implement those policies, or that they will engineer excuses in order to get rid of people, because while they state that they understand that pregnant women are not necessarily a financial burden, there is still an eye on the bottom line. There is still a concern about productivity and profit. There is a clear sort of cost-benefit analysis to retaining those skills and expertise, so that you're not having to recruit or train up, and the on-costs associated with that. And that's something that we have taken great pains to emphasise to employers. It is actually, there is a real economic benefit to retaining talent.
For me, it has to be accepted as part of life, as part of society, that there are children who have to be brought up, and so leaving work to attend to their needs should not be deemed as a loss for the company. That this is just part of life. Even the bosses in that company will have to do that, so why can't it be given and recognized for their employees?
In order to effect culture change, there are a number of different things that you need to see. The main one really is leadership. So what you want is an acknowledgement from the top down that maternity rights need to be respected properly in the workplace.
Everyone has the right to non-discrimination and gender equality. This should translate into a workplace where Sophia is not pushed out of her job for being pregnant, but is instead supported by her employer. However, Sophia struggles in her work while pregnant and can't take adequate rest because of hurdle number 7. In most countries, the length of maternity leave is, medically speaking, very short. What's more, she faces pressure from her employer to take less leave than she's entitled to.
Well, we have a maternity law that allows women 60 days of paid leave. A lot of those who have given birth, including myself, think that that's too short, like the 60 days. Usually what we do, and I include myself, is that I go on leave right before giving birth, so at least I have 2 months with my new baby. But it would benefit us to be able to, rest even before giving birth.
The last 1 month of delivery, a woman should have rest at home. Yeah, but right now it's left for different organizations to make those the individual policy. But it becomes a challenge for a woman who's pregnant to, work effectively. All we know, knowing that there are those emotional challenges, the physiological changes that happens in a woman who's pregnant. So that remains a challenge here.
Kenya has, majority of the companies are small companies, and people are struggling to make an end to meet. We are encouraging many people to open companies so that they create market. It's a very difficult balance between allowing the women to have the right to maternity leave and also allowing the employers an opportunity to say that that would be too long and will not make profit out of it. But it's something I think the government needs to put it a call and have people participate to give their views, because I believe there's value in having the women bond with their children and have maternity leave that is a reasonable period, so that if you're telling a mother that exclusively breastfeed for 6 months, then she needs to be at home with the baby.
Everyone has the right to maternity leave. Sophia should be able to take adequate time off work before and after childbirth. Looking after a newborn alone is difficult work, and Sophia would benefit if her partner could take on some of the burden. Hurdle 8 stands in their way. Her partner gets very little parental leave. Unequal parental leave has already worked against Sophia in the past, since employers have an incentive to hire men precisely because they are entitled to less parental leave than women.
If maternity leave is too long, that of course plays against women in labor market. This is not easy situation. One of the mechanisms which I personally do support, I think it's very important, is also to strengthen paternity leave, because the less the burden of childcare will be posed on women, but it is going to be shared by women and men, then this discriminatory practices against young women in reproductive age might be less than they are now.
CEDAW flags that both women and men should be able to access parental leave in order to look after their children. And that's really important because what it does is send a really clear message that childcare is not a gendered activity, is that actually it should be shared equally in the same way that women and men's participation in the workplace should be equal.
Everyone has the right to equality in the workplace. This should translate into everyone having access to parental leave, so they can share the burden of childcare, and so that employers are given less reason to discriminate when hiring. Sophia hits hurdle 9 when it's time for her to return to work. She's juggling childcare and full-time work, and her workplace makes no allowances for her situation.
There is no single public body that has a breastfeeding room, that has creches that would allow the women to bring their children at work. Kenya also has not graduated into the programs of working at home. So we are still into the olden ways of you must be at your desk to work. And this quite works against the women when they are in the childbearing age. So even if I were to express my milk, maybe my office doesn't have a refrigerator, so I wouldn't be able to preserve the milk. Again, we are dealing with the poverty levels that are quite high for women in this country. How many women would maybe afford to have refrigerators in their houses or to express the milk to live with your house help?
If indeed we're going to ensure exclusive breastfeeding, for instance, for the first 6 months of life, requiring a woman to go back to a full 9 to 5, that's a strain that could often spill beyond 5 p.m., is just not conducive for exclusive 6 months of breastfeeding for a child. If a mother has had to stay up most of the night with a child who's not feeling well, or just to feed the child because they wake up frequently in the night, then to require them to be in the office by 8 a.m. the next day just makes it a hostile environment for a working mom.
Flexible working is an issue that affects women at post-childbirth all the way up to retirement pretty much, because we know that women predominantly bear the burden of caring, whether it's young children or older parents. As a result, the Commission is advocating for all jobs, regardless of level, to be offered on a part-time or flexible basis, unless there's a really genuine reason why that can't happen. But again, it's creating an environment or a culture in the workplace whereby flexible working, part-time working is recognised as being a valid way of participating in the labour market. There are very kind of clear financial benefits, as well as sort of institutional benefits in terms of retaining knowledge and skills and expertise. I think it was McKinsey has calculated there's something like a 15% increase to the economy if we could retain all of the women who go on maternity leave.
Everyone has the right to equality at work. This should translate into workplace policies that respond to women's post-maternity experiences and accommodate any caring responsibilities. So far, we've assumed that Sophia works in stable, full-time, formal employment. The fact is, most working women are employed in the informal sector, and it's much harder for informal workers to access their rights.
The situation of women on short-term contracts is much worse. This is a big problem because this is a big inequality, and not all people are having access to same rights. The remedy would be if the rights of women, no matter what their employment status is concerned, that they have same entitlements. But government was always unwilling to accept this kind of obligations.
Taking a day off might be very challenging for this woman who has to be paid on day to day. Do you take a day off and you have no pay and you have no food to go and access a family planning service? So we went to Naivasha, which is a flower farm, and we've met the informal workers, the casual laborers working for the flower farms. And the aspects around their dignity was one thing that worried me. Because the employer had provided single rooms for these women, and some of them were families. So you have a mother, father, and 3 children, 4 children staying in one room. And the ones that have mature daughters, chances are that the fellow male workers also were having sex with them became an issue. Most of the unions, the leaders are men. So if the unions would be that place where they're gender sensitive and women have room to complain when the employers are not treating them well, I think it will go a long way in changing some of the policies that do exist in the informal sector.
Protections for informal workers can be strengthened through collective action, unions, and human rights.
I did participate in the Forum for Business and Human Rights in Geneva. Organizations have begun to work with the flower farms to build the capacity of the women to make sure they can demand accountability in terms of their rights, reaching out to the employers so that they can begin to respect the right to dignity and the right to work, the right to reproductive rights, so that the women are put on a stipend, maybe a monthly salary, and then to have time off, and also enjoy the maternity leave when they need to.
Everyone has the right to just and fair working conditions. Informal workers should be protected by unions and have access to the same rights as those in formal employment. In many situations, women have no choice but to work for an abusive or exploitative employer because they are driven by a greater need: survival. When living in poverty, women are often forced to take any job they can. Around the world, poverty disproportionately affects women.
Decent work for all is easier said than done. Most of the informal work in Kenya is in very indecent work environment. The balance between making it decent and productive is quite a thin line because people are looking for survival. The poverty levels are very low. So you just want a job that gives you something at the end of the day.
In Rajasthan, in the work that I did with a number of civil society organizations, amongst them were also domestic workers, unions, women working and campaigning for better wages. But these were contexts where reproductive violations and sexual violations were not part of the conversation, even though this was a major kind of experience that they had. So there's been a real silence in terms of these kinds of issues being brought up.
Everyone has the right to an adequate standard of living. This should translate into women being able to have agency in their choice of employment and being empowered to reject work that violates their rights. Sophia has faced 9 hurdles to having her sexual and reproductive health rights met in the workplace and encountered 2 factors that make her more vulnerable. All these problems can be tackled with a human rights lens, drawing upon the right to decent work and non-discrimination. So are things changing? In small ways, yes. In their investigations, Winnie and Rebecca have both worked with employers who have taken a very progressive approach to workers' sexual and reproductive health needs.
We got a really good response from the private sector. A number of very high profile, very well-known employers were doing some really good progressive work in relation to gender equality in the workplace. And that's really rewarding to know that there is that commitment on the ground from employers and the fact that they want to promote what they're doing and encourage others to improve their practice.
Safaricom company in Kenya had a visionary leader. So apart from just investing in women, he invested in people with disabilities in terms of giving them an opportunity to go and work, but also just introducing disability-friendly offers. He then introduced prolonged maternity leave, breastfeeding room for the staff. So going an extra mile just to facilitate the woman to be productive by appreciating that there's nothing wrong with the reproductive role.
There's plenty more work to be done to ensure that women and other marginalised groups have their sexual and reproductive health needs met in the workplace. But by working together and learning from each other, we can move closer to a world where every woman accesses her right to decent work and is free from discrimination. you.